Transportation in America was exploding. From the turn of the last century on, there were hundreds of automobile manufacturers, large and small. Countless models, styles, and commercial adaptations. Bicycle and carriage makers were now investing their talent into this exciting new phenomena, the horseless carriage. It was an era of raw energy and creative innovation. A freewheeling time when experimentation in transportation was king, from gasoline engines to steam-powered and everything in between. Many of these fledgling companies lasted only a few years, names long forgotten, like the 1917 Franklin, made in Syracuse, New York, the 1925 Julian Sport Coupe, featuring an air-cooled six-cylinder engine, and the Peerless, manufactured in Cleveland, Ohio. The Peerless would have made anyone's top 10 list of the time. Even the famous race car driver Barney Oldfield raced a Peerless, setting a world speed record in 1904. Survival in this new emerging automotive business depended on many things. It definitely was not for the faint of heart. The one constant were the intrepid entrepreneurs who built this new industry. These men were mavericks, men that were scrappy, tough as nails, and never wavered from their goal.
Country that could match this car at its price.
One who stands out in the annals of automotive history was Walter P. Chrysler, whose legacy would reach far into the next century, changing and influencing our American culture. Chrysler was considered a great American industrialist with the ability to take a failing car company and turn it into a brilliant success, and in the process, creating his own dynasty. He was a man of insight and intuition who was not afraid to buck the prevailing trends and was able to see far beyond his present situation. He succeeded by following his instincts for innovative engineering. Chrysler climbed his way to the top from the simplest of backgrounds. He reflected the pioneering and entrepreneurial spirit that created the unique American experience of that era. Walter P. Chrysler was born in 1875. America in 1875 was struggling in the aftermath of the Civil War. Reconstruction was winding down. Eastern eyes now turned to westward expansion, in particular Kansas, located on the eastern edge of the Great Plains and imbued with the lore of the American West. In 1875, Kansas was characterized by a restless energy. Wild West towns sprang up. The Chisholm Trail was established, bringing massive cattle drives up from Texas to the stockyards of Abilene. The expanding railroad played a large part in populating Kansas, bringing immigrant populations from the East and Europe, inspired by the concept that they had conquered the right to the soil they trod. They now put their ingenuity to work to develop the land. In the small town of Wamego, Kansas, 1875 would be a momentous year for a German immigrant family.
They were German immigrants who came over to the United States in the 1800s and moved eventually to Canada and then finally to Kansas in the 1860s. Their name was originally spelled with a GR, Chrysler, but they later Americanized it to CHR, Chrysler.
Walter P. Chrysler was born into an era where the prevailing characteristic was the need to overcome obstacles. It was the grand aim of the typical Kansian life. It was this strict work ethic that would forever shape Chrysler's life.
As he was a very stubborn, strong-willed man who admitted himself in his autobiography that he had a short temper and really didn't like to listen to anybody's advice. He was very inquisitive, always interested in learning how things operated, from railroad locomotives to automobiles.
Walter P. Chrysler's love of machines began with his father Henry, a locomotive engineer. Automobiles were still unheard of when Walter was born. Steam power was the order of the day, and little Walter was fascinated by these coal-burning, smoke-belching behemoths.
When Walter Chrysler was a young boy, he built an exact duplicate copy of the locomotive that his father ran as a locomotive engineer. This was a working copy, and he had tracks and so forth, and set up a whole locomotive setup in his backyard.
Though his father had hopes that his son would someday go to college and become a businessman, Walter had other ideas. He wanted to work on machines.
Not books, but the things themselves were teaching me everything that I wished to know. Wished. That word is not strong enough to describe my passion to learn about machines and the power that made them run.
As a young boy, his father, who was a locomotive engineer, let Walter ride the train with him in his normal routes, and this got Walter interested in how railroad locomotives worked.
So in 1892, Walter went to work for Union Pacific Railroad. Walter was a quick learner and ambitious. However, his father wanted him to go to college.
Walter didn't really want to go to college. He wanted to train as a machinist and went to work on his own in the local railroad roundhouse, sweeping the floors until he finally convinced his father to let him enter into the railroad apprenticeship program, where he could become a machinist.
By 1897, now 22 years old, he was looking for new opportunities to prove himself.
He had a thirst for knowledge, as most of us do. And that's where his genius was learning. And he tried a lot of things, and he wasn't afraid to try.
For the next 8 years, Walter roamed the width and breadth of America as a journeyman engineer. Gradually, he rose to become a master mechanic. Now having saved just enough to realize his dream of marrying Della Forker, his longtime love. He wrote Della and told her to choose a day for their wedding. Then, as any other man of his day, he went out and bought a derby hat and appropriate clothes. He assured Della that he had enough money for expenses to carry them over to his next payday. On June 6, 1901, Walter and Della were married in a small ceremony at the Methodist Church in Ellis, Kansas. From this point on, Della would prove to be her husband's strongest supporter.
Della really had the patience of an angel. Walter changed jobs dozens of times while they were married, and she always went along with his decisions. She trusted his judgment and would always say, "Well, Dad, if that's what you want to do, let's go ahead and do it."
In 1905, Walter decides to take a job with the Chicago Great Western Railroad. His pay of $200 a week was a good salary for its time. Walter's days of roaming seemed over. He felt he had reached the top. However, Walter's life was about to take a whole new turn. His job still required him to travel. But on one trip in 1908, his life changed forever. He went to his first auto show. Walter became so fascinated by a locomobile that he returned every day to look at it. Automobiles opened Walter's eyes to a whole new world of machines.
Walter Chrysler attended the Chicago Automobile Show in 1908 and saw this beautiful locomobile automobile, decided to buy it. The problem was he only had $700 in savings and the car cost $5,000. He ended up borrowing the remaining $4,300 from a banker friend of his so that he could buy the car. In the meantime, his poor wife, Della, I think, was probably being driven crazy by this because he bought this very expensive car which he couldn't afford, and he wouldn't even drive it.
I didn't simply want a car I could ride in, but I wanted a machine so I could learn everything about it. And why not? I'm a machinist, and these self-propelled vehicles are the most amazing machines that have ever been offered to men.
When Walter got home, he did what any self-respecting engineer would do.
Took it apart, put it back together. He wanted to see how things were made. Remember, he was dealing with railroad cars and engines that were huge. This was finer, smaller, and he wanted to see the latest technology. The Locomobile was a very fine automobile.
Along with Locomobile, automobile manufacturers were struggling to keep their name brands out in the public. Automakers like Ford, Oldsmobile, and Cadillac, along with others that are now forgotten, such as Franklin, Stanley Steamer, Stutz, and the Mercer Raceabout. The competition between the automakers was intense.
Well, the larger manufacturers entered their cars in various durability races or runs, and when their cars finished, that was proof enough that these were reliable, durable cars.
Racing contests and endurance racing were catching fire with the public and swept across the country. One of the most popular was the Vanderbilt Cup races. Begun by Willie K. Vanderbilt Jr., grandson of Commodore Cornelius Vanderbilt, and heir to the Vanderbilt fortune. Eccentric, fun-loving, sportsman, and lover of very fast cars. So much so that he was the first American to hold the land speed record in France in 1902. In 1904, Willie K. launched the first major trophy race in America, an international race to influence American manufacturers to get into racing, attracting top racers from America as well as Europe, all lured by a large cash prize and a beautiful sterling silver trophy designed by Tiffany, which had been commissioned by Willie K. The race was held on a course set out in Nassau County on Long Island, New York, attracting massive crowds of up to 300,000 people. They came to see this new novelty of speed and to see American racers triumph over their European counterparts. Chrysler, like others in his era, was fascinated by the expanding automotive industry, especially the racing. But when it came to distances, no other endurance race received more publicity than the New York to Paris race held on February 12, 1908. The race, sponsored by the New York Times and the French newspaper Le Matin, became the focus of worldwide attention. The race was to cover 22,000 miles, crossing 3 continents. It seemed impossible considering the winter snows, lack of roads, and no services in 1908. The entry list was short: 3 French, 1 Italian, 1 German, and 1 American, the Thomas Flyer.
The Thomas Flyer, the 1907 Thomas Flyer, a 4-cylinder car manufactured in Buffalo, New York by the E.R. Thomas Company. Quality of the Thomas is what led the whole industry in the U.S. To name it as the car to represent the U.S. in the 1908 race.
169 days after leaving New York City, the Thomas Flyer, driven by Charles Schuster, arrived in Paris to a hero's welcome. It was the car that introduced the rest of the world to the American automobile. While the Thomas Flyer was winning all the accolades for doing the almost impossible, Walter Chrysler was carving out his destiny. He had left the railroad, and through an old acquaintance, he landed a job at the American Locomotive Company in Pittsburgh. The company's Allegheny plant was in disarray, and Walter's job as superintendent was to fix it. Within a year, it was up and running again and making money. His achievement impressed board member and chairman of General Motors, James J. Storrow. In 1912, Walter was offered the post of works manager for the Buick Motor Company in Flint, Michigan. Yet again, Walter worked his magic. He introduced a form of assembly line, increased production, and lowered costs.
Let's face it, it was stocks and bonds, and it was profit, and people didn't want to lose their money. And who do you go to? You go to the guy that's shown that he's successful. And Walter P. Chrysler was a fix-it man.
William C. Durant, now president of GM, got wind that his most successful manager at Buick would be leaving at the end of his contract. He met with Chrysler and made him an offer that was hard to refuse. It would make Chrysler president of Buick and first VP of General Motors with an unheard of salary of $500,000 a year.
Billy Durant was the penultimate salesman. He created General Motors in 1908 by buying out and combining hundreds of automobile manufacturers and parts suppliers. He really lived to make the deal. He was a deal maker.
Walter accepted, and thus began the bumpy ride between Chrysler and Durant.
Their relationship was really a love-hate relationship. Walter Chrysler admired Durant, but Durant made a lot of decisions without consulting Walter Chrysler, and this drove Chrysler crazy. He eventually left General Motors because of Durant's behavior.
Chrysler spent 4 years as president of Buick, constantly sparring with Durant. As he said himself, he spoke bluntly by habit. He was never shy about telling Durant when he thought his ideas were wrong. Gradually, this drove a wedge between the two men. Chrysler realized that Durant could not forgive or forget. When his contract was up, he decided to retire. Even though he had battles with Durant, Chrysler still had the utmost respect and admiration for him.
Walter Chrysler once said that Billy Durant could coax a bird out of a tree. He was that convincing a salesman. But in the end, Walter Chrysler, even though he was paid $500,000 a year to work as an executive at General Motors, ended up breaking with Durant and leaving General Motors, claiming he was going to go into an early retirement at a very young age.
Now at 45, Chrysler found himself out of work for the first time in his life.
Well, Walter entertained groups of his male friends for months at a time after he retired, and they drove Della, Chrysler's wife, crazy. They would come over, smoke their cigars, eat their food, dirty up the house, and she finally told Walter that he had to get a job because she couldn't deal with this anymore.
The year was 1920, and it would prove momentous for Chrysler. John N. Willys, whom Chrysler had known during his early years at Buick, was now in terrible trouble at Willis Overland to the tune of $50 million. The bankers were hounding Willis Overland for their money.
He was asked to take and improve Willys Overland in New Jersey, I believe it is. And he was given $1 million a year to turn their fortunes around. And he was doing very well at it.
Thereafter, Chrysler moved his family to New York and took over the company.
The Willys Overland Company in New Jersey and earned a salary of $1 million a year. He was the first $1 million man. He also insisted that he would be able to live on Long Island and enjoy all the benefits of New York City.
Chrysler rolled up his sleeves and went to work cutting executive salaries, tightening managing practices, and becoming personally involved in negotiations with creditors and suppliers. Within a year, the company was on the road to recovery.
At the same time, he met the three engineers who were to be the backbone of his company, Jim Zader, Owen Skelton, and Carl Breer.
These three engineers became known as the Three Musketeers. When Walter was hired in 1921 to help Maxwell Chalmers out of debt, he took Breer, Zader, and Skelton with him.
They were considered, without doubt, to be the most outstanding team of automotive engineers in the industry for about a 30-year period. They introduced dozens and dozens of automotive innovations which were put into Chrysler's automobiles.
In lieu of a large salary, Walter asked for stock options and quickly took control of Maxwell Chalmers, who had built its reputation on the racetrack with well-engineered cars like the famous 11 Maxwell. It was the car of choice for famous racers like Eddie Rickenbacker and the colorful race driver Barney Oldfield. Maxwell was very successful. It was a great car, and they were good right up until the time they were bought out by Chrysler. Walter Chrysler planned to build on that reputation, and he turned to Breer, Skelton, and Zader to supply the car. What they came up with was the 1924 six-cylinder Chrysler 70, touted as a car that had quality from the headlights to the taillights.
The quality was there, and the first model did go 70 miles an hour, guaranteed.
Many consider the 1924 Chrysler 6 to be the first modern car.
They thought it was revolutionary. First of all, it was a high compression engine.
The engine in the 1924 6 was a forerunner of Chrysler's legendary Hemi.
It was in a rather small body and therefore had the speed and the pickup, and it was expensive for that time. It was around $1,500 on average.
Chrysler wanted to debut the new Chrysler Model 70 at the New York Auto Show, but it did not qualify because it was not yet into production. Only cars currently being produced were allowed. Chrysler, in desperate need of financing to begin production, comes up with a unique concept. He takes over the lobby of the Commodore Hotel and creates his own auto show.
During the auto show, he offered free rides in front of the Commodore Hotel, test drives to anybody who wanted them. They had a number of cars there.
Walter Chrysler's first car, the Chrysler 6, was really a remarkable mid-priced car at the time it was introduced in 1924. It had a lot of very innovative features, including four-wheel hydraulic brakes, a high-compression engine, improved suspension system, and a thermometer on the dashboard. It was really quite a reasonably priced car considering all of its advanced features.
Boys, Mr. Breyer, Mr. Skelton, and myself have gone over the design and specifications of this new car. And I want to say we're pleased and most enthusiastic. And here they come. Beneath that sparkling exterior is honest and careful workmanship, that inbuilt quality and strength which makes it possible for this car to withstand even a test like this.
And their whole thing was they were really the first ones to go and test everything. They really wanted to know what was good and what was not good. The engineering prowess is what really sold the car. They sold 30,000 approximately the first year, which was incredible.
In June 1925, Maxwell Chalmers was reorganized as the Chrysler Motor Company, and a legend was born.
Well, in June of 1925, Walter Chrysler created the legal entity called the Chrysler Corporation. Although he had been manufacturing and selling Chrysler automobiles for 18 months before that time, he basically converted all of the assets of the Maxwell Motor Car Company into this new Chrysler Corporation. For the first 18 months that Chrysler cars were sold, they were sold by the Maxwell Corporation in Maxwell dealerships.
Walter Chrysler had founded his company on shrewd insight and quality engineering.
Almost from the moment that Chrysler was conceived as a company where they realized a higher standard of engineering and leadership than most other companies to that day could offer in that price range.
It was a winning combination, the L70, L80, and Chrysler Imperial. They were regarded as some of the finest cars on the road.
The quality was there, and the first model did go 70 miles an hour, guaranteed. And later in 25, when they came out with late 25, they came out with the Imperial E80. It just meant it went 80 miles an hour or more.
Chrysler was making huge inroads to the average car buyer. Most Americans could afford a Chrysler car, and they liked them. They were so popular that within the first year of production, plants were opened in Canada and Europe, with sales approaching the 200,000 mark. Walter looked to expand his operation.
Well, not until 1928, when Chrysler transformed the Chrysler Corporation into a very serious competitor with General Motors and Ford.
Walter P. Chrysler's vision is now focused on how best to broaden his base of operations. His eagle eye lands on the Dodge Brothers Company. He likes the name recognition, the large dealer network, and above all, the factories, the innovative test tracks, foundries, and stamping plants. The Dodge brothers, John Francis and Horace Elgin, were born in Niles, Michigan. The brothers were described as tall, red-haired, tough, and heavy-fisted, with a bellicose manner. The Dodge brothers had grown rich, making component parts for Ford and the Oldsmobile Company. Horace was the engineer mechanic, and John was the genius businessman banker. There's no doubt they played a leading role in this fledgling automotive industry. By 1913, they decided to design and produce their namesake car. In 1914, the first all-steel body Dodge was launched. It was so successful that within 2 years they had become the fourth largest automaker in America. Tragically, while attending a New York auto show in 1920, John would become ill and die. 11 months later, his brother Horace would follow him to his grave. Their widows, now faced with running a car company, decided to sell. Clarence Dillon of Dillon Reeder and Company made them an offer they couldn't refuse. It was the largest cash deal in American history, $140 million plus $50 million in goodwill. In the summer of 1928, Clarence Dillon approaches Chrysler about buying Dodge. Chrysler had already decided he wanted the company. At the Ritz-Carlton Hotel in New York City, a marathon negotiating session took place, with Chrysler finally hammering out the deal he wanted. Later, Chrysler would say, "It was one of the soundest acts of my life." Chrysler Corporation is now the third largest automaker in the country.
More than anything, what Walter P. Chrysler and his men wanted was their production facilities and their plants, especially the forging plants, where they could actually begin to make more of their own parts. That was the value of why they bought it.
Chrysler introduces 3 new Dodge 6-cylinder models that sell for about $1,000. Fred Zeter's enthusiasm for the new Dodges was evident in this meeting with Walter P.
Mr. Chrysler, we put everything we had into this new Dodge car. The more we test it, the more we drive it, the more we love it. It's the automobile I've always wanted to create for Dodge Brothers.
Fred, you're proud of this car, aren't you?
You're damn right I am.
Up until now, Chrysler had concentrated on cars that were targeted at well-heeled customers. In 1928, he decides to take the plunge and go head-to-head with Ford and GM for the big time.
In 1928, he purchased the Dodge Brothers Company and created 2 entirely new brands, the Plymouth and the DeSoto, enabling Chrysler to offer a full range of automobiles. At that point, he really became a serious competitor with both General Motors and Ford.
The new DeSoto was named after the 16th century Spanish explorer Hernando de Soto, who discovered the Mississippi River. From the beginning, this car created a buzz at its first preview. It attracted more than 1,500 dealers across the country. The DeSoto also had great appeal for the public. It was a well-priced 6-cylinder engine with 55 horsepower.
It had advances that we use today, like the rear seats in front of the axle, the engine, the front engine over the front axles. It changed everything.
Production of the DeSoto was phenomenal. In its first year, 81,065 were produced, a record that would stand for 30 years. In 1933, to introduce the new DeSoto, Chrysler comes up with an incredibly unique publicity stunt. He hires famed race car driver Harry Hartz to drive a DeSoto backward from New York to San Francisco. But in reality, the car had been set up backward. This stunt served dual purposes: to bring attention to the DeSoto line and also the engineering staff at Chrysler. This proved their aerodynamic theory that their wind tunnel testing had shown. This was the start of modern aerodynamics and re-evaluating car designs to make it faster and more fuel efficient.
Chrysler was a corporation under the direction of Mr. Chrysler, was way out in front. They were way out in front of everybody. And they lasted that way for a long time.
With his brainchild, the Plymouth, Chrysler hits the jackpot.
It was so good that Walter P. Chrysler drove over to Henry Ford and gave him one, a Plymouth Model PA. one of the first off the line. Just drove over and gave it to him.
Like Henry Ford, Walter's goal was a car the American family could afford. The Plymouth was his answer.
Well, the Plymouth was intended to be a low-price competitor to compete head-to-head with Ford and Chevrolet. It would be a high-volume product which would really advance the Chrysler Corporation's success.
In 1929, the year the stock market crashed, over 100,000 were sold. Because of their popularity, Chrysler was the only company to increase sales throughout the Depression.
Chrysler made so much money in 28, 29 that the Depression didn't hurt them at all. They actually acted as their own bank.
In 1928, Chrysler also introduced the LeBaron Club Coupe, a real head-turner. Styling was refined somewhat from the earlier cars, and the standard wheelbase was extended to 136 inches. The Club Coupe was several years ahead of its time in terms of design as well as engineering advances. The horsepower was also raised to a neck-snapping 112. The result was that the LeBaron was stunning, very fast, topping 100 miles per hour and giving Chrysler a new direction and market. While other car companies were fighting to stay afloat, Chrysler was plowing ahead, investing in new plants, new ideas. The 1931 Plymouth introduced rubber engine mounts to dampen engine vibration, which Chrysler called floating power. And on their company flagship, the Chrysler Imperial, no expense was spared to make it one of the finest cars of its time, and was very successful with the public.
The 1931 Chrysler Imperial was a very important car for Chrysler. It was the second most powerful car that you could buy in America at the time, second only to Duesenberg. It was a car that had a very long wheelbase, long enough to carry some very elegant, stylish, regal coachwork, like enormous convertible sedans and very rakish, low-slung roadsters.
It was a car that mirrored Walter's elevated status. He was now a millionaire many times over, a respected man in society. In 1929, he decided to have a skyscraper built in New York City that would be a monument to the achievement of American engineering. Designed by William von Ehlen, it is considered a masterpiece of Art Deco architecture. Walter personally oversaw every detail of the design. The Art Deco lobby featured African marble, chrome, and stylized frescoes. When it was completed in 1930, the Chrysler building stood at 1,046 feet and 77 stories, the tallest structure in the world. The former railroad engineer was quite literally on top of the world.
He built it for cash, and it's a phenomenal building. If you look at on the outside of the building, you'll see the ornaments, and they're basically Chrysler radiator caps. They're wing Vikings, is what they really are. And the inside of the building is phenomenal, and in published reports, he built it so his sons could have something to do.
And to remind people of his humble beginnings, his toolbox was put on public display. Even as a rich and famous man, Walter wanted to be known as an American workman.
Walter Chrysler saw himself as never very far away from his very humble roots as a sweeper working in a railroad roundhouse. Even though he became very rich and very famous nationally and internationally, he always remained very modest, humble man who saw himself as just a workman.
The Chrysler building may no longer be the tallest in the world, but it has become part of the timeless landscape of New York City and was declared a National Historic Landmark in 1976. Walter's greatest legacy was still to come. In 1933, Chrysler and his engineers began rethinking how cars were designed and manufactured. What they came up with would revolutionize how cars were made. In 1934, Chrysler introduced a new innovative car, the Airflow, the first production car to be built in America using aerodynamic principles.
Well, the Airflow was the creation of Carl Breer, who was one of the three musketeers who worked as Chrysler's engineers.
The Chrysler Airflow saves power, gives you more miles for your money.
He had seen some military aircraft flying through the air very almost motionlessly, and figured out that they could travel that way because they were aerodynamic. And he thought, well, how can we redesign our cars to make them more aerodynamic? The Airflow was a very radical car, aerodynamic in its shape, with a lot of very innovative features. Ultimately, the Airflow was not a success for the Chrysler Corporation because people could not get used to its very radical appearance. They didn't like the way it looked, to put it bluntly.
In fact, the entire car was an engineering wonder. The frame of the car was made of tubular steel with the body panels attached.
In this car, you ride inside the frame instead of on top of it, for the frame is an integral part of the body. Let this Husky show you the great strength of even a miniature model of this body construction. He tips the scales at 200 pounds, yet the model carries that load easily without distortion. The sturdy steel girders of this bridge-type frame are given added strength and rigidity by the steel body panel.
All modern cars are now built this way, but in 1934 it was a major innovation, and there were other features that were advanced for their time.
Now they're setting the stage for that dreaded motoring catastrophe, a tire blowout. And just to make sure of a thorough job, old Dead-Eye Don is going to use a shotgun. As the car speeds down the track, our sharpshooter draws bead, and you'd naturally expect a dive for the ditch, but the car continues without a waver. What balance and steering control. Look at that hole. Ah, what a picture. All right, siege gun, burn in your fast one. Aha! The dew-plate safety glass turns back even the pitcher's bullet delivery. True, the glass cracked, but it did not shatter and fly like ordinary glass. Make a note of that, too, in choosing your next car.
But they also were looking at practicality in how you build a body. And if they could use the same die for the left front door, the right rear door, and then conversely they saved the cost of two door dies. That was a big item. To get what he wanted, was the fastback within the wheelbase and the length of the car, they had to shove the whole seating package forward. And so doing, the engine moves forward. And the result is that they got an almost equal springing on the front end and the rear end, where previously they'd had more weight on the rear end of the car, so they had a longer rear spring of the cars. While on the Airflow, equal springing, they developed what we call now the Boulevard ride.
Although it sported only a standard six-cylinder engine, the Airflow set all sorts of speed records.
Here's the last lap. The pit crew goes hysterical. The record. All records up to 2,000 miles in 24 hours are in the bag. The Chrysler ran a marathon and ran it at sprinting speed.
In spite of its creative innovation, the Airflow was a financial flop. The styling of the car was just too radical for the time.
The whole car was really based on performance. And then they offered this view of the future at the end of the Depression, when people are really seeking to break out of this constraint, this egg that held them back, this difficult economic time. And here is a view of the future, and that's the way they present it. It was tremendously exciting, but it was arbitrary.
The demise of the Airflow also signaled the birth of a new reality in the automobile industry. Up until this time, the Airflow cars had primarily been sold on engineering innovation. From then on, styling would begin to play a greater role in automobile design. Early in 1935, Chrysler, in failing health, decides to step down as president of Chrysler Corporation. His choice to succeed him was K.T. Keller, whom he had first hired in 1926 and personally guided his career from that time on. Fortune magazine described Keller as heavy, hardy, and a two-fisted go-getter. In K.T. Keller, Chrysler felt a kindred spirit. He said that he had that same love for machines that had dominated my life. Like Chrysler, who always wanted to be known as an American workman, Keller too wanted to be known as a machinist by trade. Walter P. was now chairman of the board, leaving the day-to-day operations to Keller.
Chrysler's focus was on engineering with the Three Musketeers. The styling took the second seat in the car. It was not first seat. However, they did a hell of a job. They were bold. They used colors very well. But the engineers, until recent times, ruled the roost. They don't rule the roost anymore because people buy style. In those days, they bought engineering. That's what really started the car.
In 1941, Chrysler, never afraid of challenges, changed direction and introduced a spectacular show car.
They tried different things, and Chrysler's always been unique in the fact they put out a show car. And in 1941, they brought out two different show cars. Came out with the Newport, which was a dual cowl Phaeton, which paced the 1941 Indy 500.
One of only 6 ever made, the Newport was a spectacular show car. The idea of these traveling showcases was to highlight Chrysler's vision for the future.
On December 7th, 1941, came the news flash that stunned our nation. We were at war.
The automobiles of the times of peace were stocked. They were stored away for the duration.
K.T. Keller was approached to begin building tanks. Chrysler immediately heeded the call, and production for the war effort began in earnest. In Warren, Michigan, Chrysler's Detroit Arsenal was the first government-owned but contractor-operated facility in the country. Their engineering heritage helped them overcome manufacturing difficulties, and they were able to deliver a phenomenal 25,000 Sherman tanks, 18,000 B-29 engines, and 435,000 Army trucks, to name but a few. Walter Chrysler's insistence on engineering excellence paid off in this massive war effort to help America win the war. With the war over, the government lifts the ban on auto production in late 1945. Suddenly, it was like everyone wanted to buy a car. It was a seller's market, and a whole new era in transportation was just around the corner, the 1950s. The 1950s were a special time in American automotive styling. It was an aggressive era, fueled by a rapidly expanding economy. American automotive companies were now into an unrestrained exuberance in car designs. GM, in particular, was designing their cars with a flair for the tail fin. Design chief Harley Earl, inspired by the Lockheed P-38 Lightning, introduced small fins on the 1948 and 49 Cadillacs. Chrysler, seeing the handwriting on the wall, brings in a superior stylist in Virgil Exner to bring Chrysler to the next level. Virgil Exner's styling genius began his career at GM, hired by legendary Harley Earl, and before the age of 30 was head of styling at Pontiac. He next moves on to Raymond Loewy's design group. After the war, he joined Studebaker, where he is credited with the designing of the renowned 1947 Studebaker Starlight Coupe. GM styling in the late 40s was rapidly changing, with sales escalating. Chrysler sensed the public's desire for breakout automotive styling.
1950s, it was quite an era because cars prior to that were the boxy, reliable cars. When 50s came along, public wanted something different.
In 1949, Exner joins Chrysler's advanced styling group to design and develop idea cars.
He wanted something more than what the automobile had offered in the past. He wanted people to be excited about their car. And when he came into the fold with Chrysler, they gave him a free hand. He came up with what you see here with these cars and was very successful.
Exner's first car for Chrysler was the Chrysler K10 to introduce the revolutionary 1951 Hemi V8 engine. With this car, Exner showcases his pure automobile design philosophy, which featured the functional elements of the car, like the spare tires, radiator, grille, and wheels, instead of hiding them as previously had been the custom. The era of the 50s harkened back to the 30s with the concept of creating your own custom look for your car.
I remember my dad went in about a 50-60 Soto, and the sales representative took him into the showroom. You could choose your motor, choose your transmission, choose a variety of color combinations, upholstery combinations, options.
Virgil Exner quickly climbed the ladder of success at Chrysler, and by 1953 became head of styling with complete autonomy, and history was made. Exner goes to work and comes up with some of the most creative designs ever produced.
Today the latch string is really out at this tremendous proving grounds. And now for a glimpse of some of tomorrow's glamour on wheels, idea cars, conceived and built to explore new developments in engineering and design. Here are promises for the future, parading past the stand.
They wanted something that was exciting and something that was risky, and that's what they found in these cars.
He enlarged the tail fins as well, making them a much more prominent feature. He especially liked the visual effect on the car. The use of color became a prominent design feature in itself.
There was many color combinations, but I think the way that the color combination enhances the fins, with the red towards the back coming back, it makes the front a little sleek, pushed down a little bit, and it shows that forward look once again.
By 1957, Exner had brought Chrysler to the forefront of automotive design, making the cars sleeker, smoother, more aggressive appearing with their long hoods, short decks, and lowering the roofline. Thus, the forward look in styling was born.
The colors were part of the 50s. We're moving forward. Life is good. Economy's good. Women are a part of it now. We're going to make it appeal to everybody. You know, in 1956, I think, Dodge came out with a particular model designed just for the women. It was called the La Femme. They were pink. They had a lot of gold trim on them. So I think the color that we saw with all these pastels that in the 50s was a sign of the times. We're moving forward, and we want more than just grays and browns and blacks. And that's what the post-World War II cars were. I think they were very influential in developing not only the economy, but society of itself. I think it was demonstrative of society.
No one could doubt that Chrysler cars were here to stay.
We want to show off. We want to show the public we are here to stay. We are no longer that stodgy little Dodge that you saw in 1949 or 1948. This is the car of the future.
The 1957 Auto Show was all about styling and tail fins.
Record numbers throng into the Coliseum for the 42nd National Automobile Show. Styling verges on the spectacular, from air-scoop grills to the dramatically sweeping tail fins that dominate most of the 57 models. There's a trend to the sporty and more colorful. Detroit's designing geniuses keep pace with a nation that's taking more and more to the road.
The nation was going car crazy, and at its heart was auto racing, which manufacturers capitalized on to promote the performance of their brands.
Well, it was widely believed that if you won on Sunday, you would sell cars on Monday.
It was from their forays into racing that Chrysler engineers began experimenting with a new type of engine, the Hemi.
The Chrysler Hemi was originally done by a group of engineers from Chrysler that Chrysler wanted a high-performance image. They wanted to get into racing, and they commissioned this group of engineers to build a new engine, and they came up with the Hemi.
Briggs Cunningham, heir to the Swift meatpacking fortune, was an international racer and America's Cup winner, as well as manufacturing his own namesake high-performance car, the Cunningham. In 1950, Briggs Cunningham purchased the prototype 331 cubic inch Chrysler Hemi and made a very respectable showing at Le Mans. When the engine became generally available in 1951, racers were quick to take note.
Chrysler's engineers developed the hemispheric engine in the early 1950s. The engine design allowed the engine to develop a lot more power from the same cubic displacement. The Hemi engine gave Chrysler complete dominance in auto racing in the 1950s, both NASCAR, drag racing, and other kinds of racing.
Stock car racing embraced the Hemi. On the NASCAR circuit from 1954 to 1956, the 331 and 354 cubic inch Hemis were nearly unbeatable. In 1954, Lee Petty drove his Hemi-powered Chrysler to win the NASCAR championship. It was Chrysler's first NASCAR title, breaking the hold enjoyed by Oldsmobile and Hudson.
It got to be such a dominant package in NASCAR that they handicapped them so much on the engine because it was so powerful and did such a fantastic job at the NASCAR tracks like Daytona and Talladega.
Racing legend Richard Petty, driving the formidable number 43, had stock car racing sewn up.
The crowd cheers as Richard Petty in his number 43 Plymouth takes the checkered flag going away.
Needless to say, his competition quickly got the message. In 1964, Chrysler introduced the most famous Hemi of them all, the 426. The engine was a potent force, especially on the NASCAR circuit in the 60s and early 70s. While NASCAR struggled over how to limit the 426, drag racers were experimenting with the Hemi to get maximum horsepower. Aluminum blocks, superchargers, and countless other modifications transformed the Hemi into the definitive drag racing engine.
It made a lot of horsepower. We won a lot of races with it, and a lot of people won a lot of races. I mean, that was the engine to have. And then the engine was exploited as far as drag racing went, and it was a very, very powerful engine. And basically the engines that are built today that are all aluminum, that are made by aftermarket manufacturers, is really a direct copy of the 426 Chrysler Hemi. Most of your exotic race engines that are built today are Hemi-type engines.
The Hemi was a success story in the Chrysler engineering tradition, but in the late 70s, due in part to the fuel crisis, the company lost its way. Only a bailout by the government would save it from bankruptcy. Chrysler petitioned the U.S. government on September 7, 1979, for $1.5 billion in loan guarantees to ward off bankruptcy. In a sense, Chrysler had come full circle. The company that was built on Walter P.'s reputation as a fix-it man now needed fixing itself. And they found that person in Lee Iacocca, who became chairman of Chrysler.
Lee Iacocca ironically rode in to rescue the Chrysler Corporation like a white knight, much like Walter Chrysler had done many decades earlier at Willys Overland and at the Maxwell Corporation.
And a four-door sedan that offers impressive gas mileage.
Iacocca was a very charismatic spokesperson, appearing in television commercials, challenging consumers.
Oh, one more thing. If you can find a better car, buy it.
The Chrysler Corporation Loan Guarantee Act of 1979 was passed into law and signed by President Jimmy Carter. Chrysler Engineering takes center stage with the new K-Car platform and the minivan concept. In 1983, the loans were completely repaid ahead of schedule, and with that, the U.S. government made a profit of $350 million. By the mid-1990s, Chrysler had become the most profitable car company in the world, making it attractive to many in the global marketplace. This resulted in Chrysler merging with Daimler-Benz in 1998. The cost-cutting began by phasing out the Plymouth brand and blending Chrysler engineering with that of Mercedes. The new collaboration results in the Chrysler Crossfire. Returning to full-size cars in 2004 and the reintroduction of the Chrysler 300 with the new Hemi V8, it was immediately successful.
Brother, can you spare a dime?
But in October 2008, in an enormous economic world downturn, Chrysler finds itself in dire straits, as well as other automakers worldwide. Chrysler appeals to the U.S. government for assistance. Chrysler's importance to America's economic livelihood cannot be stressed enough. President George W. Bush on December 19, 2008, allocates a $13.5 billion loan for Chrysler and others. By April 30, 2009, Chrysler is forced to file for bankruptcy, but with the full backing of the U.S. government. In a special press conference to the nation, President Barack Obama summed up the importance of this iconic American car company.
I can report that the necessary steps have been taken to give one of America's most storied automakers, Chrysler, a new lease on life. This is a company that has a particular claim on our American identity. It's a company founded in the early years of the American automobile industry, a company that helped make the 20th century an American century.
Incredibly, on June 10, 2009, the new Chrysler emerges just 41 days after filing for bankruptcy.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, the new Chrysler is open for business.
Today, I am pleased to announce that Chrysler and Fiat have formed a partnership that has a strong chance of success.
As President Obama has said, this is the company that helped create an American century. The minivans that took us on vacations, to Little League and soccer games. The retro prowler that thrilled hot rod enthusiasts everywhere, and the PT Cruiser that made baby boomers' hearts sing. And not to be forgotten, and perhaps the most iconic of all, the one that restored the reputation and heritage of Chrysler, the Viper.
The most visible embodiment of Chrysler's engineering heritage that we can see today is in the Viper. It's a car that was built up to a standard rather than down to a price.
If one wants to find a starting point for a car with the pedigree of the Viper, it is in the oil-stained machine shop of Union Pacific Railroad over 100 years ago. And a young boy who was an engineering genius, Walter P. Chrysler, whose pioneering influence would forever change and shape our driving lifestyles. Even though Walter P. died in 1940, this maverick of transportation's legacy has withstood the test of time, as evidenced by the ever-evolving Chrysler Corporation. Further generations can journey to Auburn Hills, Michigan to tour the Chrysler Museum and view the work and life of a first-class American workman.